You're listening to National Cybersecurity Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of National Cybersecurity Podcast. I'm your host, Gregory Evans. Before we get started tonight talking about this Twitter attack, I want to let everyone know that you can listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, and SoundCloud. Did I miss one? Is that everything? I think we have them on everything that's out there, including our website, National Cybersecurity News, nationalcybersecurity.com. We have National Cybersecurity Ventures. I think that covers everything. Isn't that right, Mark? Okay, cool. All right. That's my producer tonight. Now, we did miss one. I'm sorry. He's flashing it to me. If you have Alexa, all you have to do is say, Alexa, open National Cybersecurity Radio. And bam, you can listen to all our current and past podcasts. Anyways, I want to talk to you tonight about the Twitter attack. Now, I say attack because it was not a hack. It was an attack. And they stole 133 accounts. Now, I went on, and this is why I'm doing this podcast. Everybody was talking about it. But I've always talked, if you heard some of my other episodes, where I talk about other people in cybersecurity. This is not to down anybody else into cybersecurity. But there's a few things that we're going to talk about tonight. And I want you to understand this. A college degree does not make you an expert in cybersecurity. I don't care if you have a PhD from MIT. You heard me say that before. The people who work at Twitter, people who work at Facebook, people who work at some of these other social media companies, they pride themselves on trying to hire the best of the best. And a lot of times these people do not have college degrees, but their CIOs do, their CTOs. They try to get these people who look good on paper. Well, these people on paper are not hackers. They don't think like a hacker would think. And that's the exact same reason. Well, let me back up. That's the reason why Twitter got hacked or attacked. Now, I'm going to show you the difference between a true hacker and a true cybersecurity expert or so-called expert, because hackers know how to think outside the box. These guys who have these PhDs and all these degrees don't know how to think outside the box. They don't know how to think like a bad guy. As an example, Twitter has said that they're going to allow all their employees to work from home until 2022 or 24, one of those. A long time. But even if they just said, I'm going to let my employees to work from home during the pandemic, the corona pandemic, COVID-19, what they should have done was they should have made sure that every computer that their employees are using at home is secure. They should have ran a test, did a vulnerability test, scanned all the IP addresses of their employees' networks, or did a send out spam to all their employees to see which ones would click a link, because that's exactly what happened here. Now, the day this happened, July 15th, happened that morning. I went on the air 9 hours later on numerous news stations around the world talking about it. And I said the same thing. And you're going to hear one of them where I was on the radio with TRT World. They are a Turkish newspaper, or they're like a Turkish news agency. They're like CNN, but for Turkey, in the country of Turkey. Now, this is the difference between a hacker and these fake cybersecurity so-called experts, CTIOs, CIOs, all the other ones. Now, I didn't mean to say CTIOs. I just made that up because all of them make no sense. They each come up with their own fancy name. One place you go to is IT manager, which is the glorified They glorify the name at another agency by calling it a chief technology officer. You go to another one as chief information officer. Which one? Make up your mind. There's no uniform name in any of them. Okay? So here we go. So when I went on the air 9 hours later, and you're going to hear it, I had already figured out how the hackers did it. This is before Twitter did their investigation. This is before they did this so-called FBI investigation. And I want to talk about that after you hear what I have to say about the FBI, because you probably already heard me. FBIs are not hackers. They are very good at writing subpoenas to get people's IP address. But let's take that up. Let's put that to the side for a second. Hear me again. You're going to hear me in a second where I said that whoever did this either had to have had the credentials and bypassed 2-key authentications, or it was an inside job.
Security to prevent this kind of intrusion. So what does this mean for your safety online? Greg Evans joins us for more on that. He's the president of the National Cyber Security Ventures in Atlanta, Georgia. Greg, what level of sophistication does it take to pull something like this off?
Well, I want to start with this. I do not believe personally that this was an outside job. This was not some hackers from the outside that woke up that morning and was able to hack these accounts. These are very prominent people. A hacker cannot guess what your password is. So let's get that straight. All right. If they have no association with you, they're not a family member, live in the same house, they don't know what your password is. 2, they should have already had 2-key authentication set up on all of these accounts, which means even if they knew what your password was, a text message would have been sent to somebody's phone, the owners of the account's phone, or to an email account. So even if they knew, even if they clicked on a link and the hackers were able to steal a password, they couldn't bypass the 2-key authentication. The only person that can bypass 2-key authentication is someone who works at Twitter. Now, I do want you to remember this. At the beginning of this COVID-19 pandemic here in the United States, Twitter said that all of their employees could start working from home permanently. So we don't know if someone from the outside hacked into an employee's account. Did someone get access to another employee's account? But I do want you to think about this. If they hacked into Twitter itself, that means they would have had access to every Twitter account that Twitter has, including mine, yours, Kim Kardashian's, your stations, everyone, including Donald Trump, who has way more users. But they did not. They specifically targeted Vice President Joe Biden, President Obama, Jeff Bezos, who also doesn't just own Amazon, but also owns the Washington Post. And even Mike Bloomberg, who was running against the president recently and said a lot of foul things about President Trump. And his account was also hacked. So that I find that very, very suspicious that these accounts were hacked like this.
So Twitter says, Greg, that it's gonna be diagnosing the issue. So I mean, you've sort of changed the direction of my questioning here, because we're not talking about a security vulnerability. You're basically saying that this was, quote unquote, maybe an inside job. Otherwise, we might have seen more accounts impacted as a result of this. But I guess what does Twitter then do to look into this in preventing something like this from happening? And I mean, you talk about a social media platform that's huge like that, and there are real people behind it. So how do you go about preventing something like this from happening in the future? And what is the damage that's already been done?
Well, reputation damaged on Twitter's end, okay? But let me just say this. When I say what I'm telling you right now and your viewers, I'm saying this as an ex-hacker, someone who used to do this for an actual living. If I wanted to hack into, let's say, Joe Biden's account, I didn't just want to hack into Joe Biden's, I'm going to hack into other prominent people as well. So that way, Joe doesn't look like he was the only one that was targeted. That's one. Two, if you were working in the office like you do with ours, everything that you do on your computer is monitored. So we can go back and we can see what every employee is doing on their computer. But when you have your employees working from home, then you may not be able to monitor the employees' accounts. Because Twitter says we're going to do an investigation, fine, that's what everybody says. And they will do an investigation. But remember, if two-key authentication was set up, there's no way an outside hacker can bypass two-key authentication. It just doesn't happen. And these are 6 prominent Twitter accounts.
Yeah. Well, Greg Evans, we really appreciate your analysis on this story. Thanks for being with us.
Now I want you to hear what they said the very next day, less than 24 hours after I went on the air.
Twitter says it is investigating, and late tonight saying that those hackers gained access by targeting employees who had internal controls, but the company is not revealing how much data may have been compromised.
So you see what I'm saying? On July 15th, I went on the air and I said that this was an inside job. Remember, everyone, a hacker cannot just wake up in the morning and say, hey, I want to hack into Twitter, or I want to hack into a bank, or your personal email account, or your personal Facebook account. They can't just guess what your password is unless they have enough information on you, or like I said, they grew up with you, they know you personally, they live in the same household, they're your college roommate, a live-in boyfriend or girlfriend, they watched you type in your password, you share the same password, the same Netflix password, something of that sort. Yes, someone can get into your account. Now, if you have two-key authentication, they can't get into your account without them being notified first. And you will receive a notice with a 4 to 8 digit code to enter, depending on what platform you're using. So even if they knew your password, they couldn't get in. This is why I knew, being an ex-hacker, that I was right on day one. It didn't take the FBI the next day, Twitter, and all these other people making it seem like it was this big deal. The Russians were coming, knowing that it ended up being some 17-year-old kid, which brings me to this. How is it that a 17-year-old kid was able to outsmart Twitter? It's simple. He was able to think outside the box. I say this over and over and over and over again. Cybersecurity professionals who went to school, got their degrees, or they don't have anyone. I'm trying to figure out the right way of saying this. But if they don't have any larceny in them, they've never even had a speeding ticket. They don't have anybody in their family or in their community, their friends, their neighborhoods that they associated with that thought like a bad guy or was that bad guy. Remember, hackers are bad guys. They are. And they think like bad guys. You can't just read a book or watch the movie Scarface and then all of a sudden you're a bad guy and you know how bad guys think. It just doesn't happen that way. Twitter screwed up because they allowed their employees to work from home and they announced it. Now, what security protocols did Twitter put in place before allowing their employees to work from home? All these kids did was they knew the format of all the Twitter email addresses. For instance, gregory.evans@twitter.com. Or they could have went on LinkedIn and typed in Twitter, and LinkedIn would have brought up all their Twitter accounts and you could get email addresses there as well. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can get Twitter email accounts. And all they did was get these email accounts and spam every last one of them until at least one person clicked a link. Now, the bad part about it was they didn't spam the receptionist. They didn't spam the marketing people who wouldn't have never had access to bypass 2-key authentication. They knew exactly who to spam. Now, that's an issue all into itself. How did they know? You would think that this would they spammed either their security department, their IT department, or their customer service department. Now, Twitter doesn't have customer service like, you could just call up on the telephone. We all know that. Twitter has customer service where they're reading people's emails who are having problems with their Twitter account. So they may have spammed those guys, and they're the ones who clicked the link. Now, let's talk about the FBI and how they went out and did this big reporting. Let me say this, and you already know for a fact because you've already heard it 100 times. Every time a big corporation gets hacked into, they always say, we're calling in the FBI. We're working with our local, state, and federal law enforcement. That doesn't mean anything. This is why cybercrime generates 5 times more money than drug dealing in the world. In the world, not in this state, not in this country, in the world. It's because they don't have true cybersecurity people tracking down these hackers. The FBI is only tracking hackers in the United States where they can serve subpoenas, or in friendly countries where they will recognize a United States subpoena, and then it still has to go through their courts. Now, this is how it works when someone gets hacked. I know I had to go through this with the FBI myself. Someone hacks an account, okay, using an email address associated with this email address. Then Google responds back and says, my Google Home is listening to us as we're doing this. Google responds back and says, on this date and time, this email address was created and owned by this IP address. Now, unlike the movies where somebody can just type in an IP address and it automatically comes up on the screen and says, oh, this IP address belongs to this address, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. No, it doesn't work that way. All right. Because every IP address is owned by the ISP, not the individual. So once the FBI gets this subpoena back and says this IP address belongs to, is associated with this email address, they then look up that IP address like anyone else can. You can go to who.is or any of the tools out there, type in an IP address or a domain name and put it in, and it comes back and says, this IP address is owned by Verizon. Now, the FBI sends over another another subpoena, and says, on this date and time, who did this IP address belong to? Verizon will respond and say, on this day and time, this IP address belonged to President Donald Trump at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, just as an example. Now, the FBI says, okay, now we have the person's address. This is how they got the young kid's address so quickly. Now, I want you to understand this. Twitter, Google, Facebook, Verizon, AT&T, Instagram, all the big social media companies, internet-based companies, all the big telecommunications company, internet providers, all of them have what's called, what is the name? They basically have a department that's 24/7 for law enforcement, that they take calls from law enforcement. If a kid is missing and they want to find out what he has posted or where he may be logging in from on his Facebook page, the FBI can send something over to this department, call them on the phone, send the subpoena, because they still always have to have a subpoena, and say, can you tell me where this kid is right now? And Facebook will say yes. Now, that's how they tracked down this kid. They didn't use any sophisticated equipment. They didn't have all these computer screens that you see in the movies and all these guys in a room typing on a keyboard trying to figure out where these hackers are located. All they did was sit at a table with a pen and a paper, and you can write out the subpoena and send it right on over. We've done that. We've done that on civil cases as well. So this is how it works. And this is how the kid got caught. He was sloppy. Now, let's say if he had changed his IP address. If he had changed his IP address when he created the original account, the email account, when he logged into Twitter accounts, if those IP addresses were changed, you know what they would have done? They would be blaming it on a foreign country. For instance, every time you want to hack these days, change your IP address, which you can do. You can select what country you want to be from, to Russia, North Korea, China, Iran. Then everything will always point to them, because that's what's happening these days. I say it all the time. It bugs the hell out of me. People always want to make it seem like the United States do not have the best hackers in the world, or there's no other hackers in the world outside of China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. It's ridiculous. But you've heard that on my other podcast. So with that being said, you've been listening to National Cybersecurity Radio. I'm Greg Evans. I hope you enjoyed. And remember, you can listen to us on Amazon Alexa by just saying, Alexa, open up National Cybersecurity Radio. So it's just that simple. Look forward to hearing from some of you guys. You can always reach out to me at contact@GregoryDEvans.com. Thanks everyone.